Thanks for joining us for this episode, and I want to let you know about an opportunity that we host every month as part of Church Advance. It's the Church Advance Hour of Encouragement. Now, this is something, again, that we do every month, and it's actually very often content that later gets featured on the podcast. So during this time, Bryan's going to have a kind of a teaching session, and then he's going to open it up for discussion and questions, and then many times we close out the hour in prayer. And it really is an encouraging time for pastors and church leaders, and it's free for anyone who wants to join. And so I want to encourage you to have part in our next hour of encouragement. And if you want to learn more and get signed up, again, it's completely free. Just head over to bryansams.com and get registered for the next Church Advance Hour of Encouragement. That's bryansams.com. Well, thanks so much again for joining us for this episode as we continue to advance a reformation of fellowship, partnership, and gospel hope amongst Bible-believing pastors and churches. This is Church Advance with Bryan Sams.
Hey guys, I'm really excited today to share with you a session that I really feel like is super helpful for ministry leaders. And the title over the next few episodes is on this subject: Do Not Disturb, Eliminating Distractions to Become More Productive. And what I really want to share with you is some things that I learned after taking the first ministry sabbatical that I've taken in 20 years of ministry. In the summer of 2022, I took 7 weeks off of church work. I did not preach. I did not do any meetings. I did not have email access. I did not even have phone access for most of it. I just kind of shut the world out, and God really taught me some things. In fact, Luke, I would like us to link to podcast episode number 56 on the Church Advance podcast, which is where I talked about why you need a sabbatical, and I recorded that episode, I think right before or right after I either went to or came back from my sabbatical, but I've never really unpacked kind of what things I learned from that time. And that's really what I want to do today. Interestingly enough, during that 7 weeks, the first week of the 7, I spent in complete solitude with Angie on our 20th wedding anniversary trip to Jamaica. And now Angie and I have gone on what we would call a more nice trip every 5-year anniversary, where we'll go to somewhere that's, really mostly a Caribbean vacation. Sometimes we do it every year, but we usually go to a big one. It's a little more expensive, a little more exclusive, just to relax and enjoy and spend time together. So what I did the first week was just complete solitude. I mean, we didn't do any kind of television, anything. We sat, we read, we enjoyed each other. We ate nice restaurants, had a great time. I just completely unplugged and detoxed from 20 years of neck break pace ministry, really. And so, it's interesting. Other than Jesus Christ, the most important men in both testaments of Scripture, that would be Moses and Paul, were transformed by years of isolation and solitude in a remote wilderness. And there are moments in our pressure-cooked lives when years of escape to some hidden place sound wistfully compelling, meaning we wish we could go and do like the 13-year, exodus or whatever. But we know that's not realistic because our responsibilities, the calling of God in our lives for the most part is to be productive and to be, doing God's work. We're not to be slothful in business, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. However, there's got to be a balance that we strike in our lives of including moments of solitude, of rest, of quietness before the Lord, in order to recharge and to refocus and to be resent back into the work that God has called us to do. I mean, Jesus did this. He did it for both himself and his disciples. Matthew 4, verse 1, Matthew 14, verse 23, Mark 135, Luke 4:42. In fact, at Mark chapter 6, verse 31, he says, "Come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while. For there were many coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. So they departed to a deserted place in the boat by themselves." Um, I would say, Luke, we all need to replenish our resources, both inwardly and our outward person, regularly in order to re engage passionately into the work that God has called us to do. Um, Without this kind of disengagement to re engage, we become more shallow. We relate more loosely. We engage less frequently. And we reduce ultimately our productivity. It almost sounds counterintuitive that you disengage to be more productive. But the fact of the matter is, I think that's what you find in a busy, burdened, and broken world. We need to find some rest and quietness in order to both replenish ourselves and to find ourselves more productive. I mean, Luke, it's just a busy life, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. And as you're talking about this now, I've not had the 20 years, 2 decades of ministry experience that you've had, but in my what I would consider, I guess, short time in my adult life, let's put it that way. I've kind of had two segments. I've had a first half where I was working full time at a church in a ministry, and then the second half has been here where I've been self-employed, doing a little bit more of a, I guess, freelance type of work, in that way, entrepreneur life, whatever you want to call it. And I used to have this mindset, like you said, and I'm still learning and figuring it out, but it was this mindset of you have to maximize and capitalize every hour, every minute of your day. And you have to be willing to work, more than 40 hours a week. And you have to be willing to just go nonstop, dedicated to the ministry. And what's interesting is, yeah, like you said, there's seasons, there's times where being all in like that is necessary. But for me, what the resource I actually got a hold of was the book Free to Focus by Michael Hyatt. The concept that he goes on there is basically, he says, hey, statistically, if you spend more than 50 hours doing work in a week, and I know what we're going to talk about here overall is this idea of sabbatical, but just as far as your week to week workflow, if you spend more than 50 hours working, then what you're going to find is anything past those 50 hours is basically diminishing returns, because you have exhausted yourself mentally and physically to where that work is almost pointless. And that grasping that changed my complete approach to how I was doing things. And what's interesting is, like I said, you look at those two halves, this back half of my adult life, doing the entrepreneurial thing, slowing down, stepping back. I mean, still doing my fair share of work, if you will, but not being consumed with having to spend every hour of every minute of every day. I mean, this has, what I'm getting at is the back half of my adult life so far has been much more productive than my first half. And again, this is just a small little sampling, if you will. I hope have many more years to live, and we'll see how it all plays out. But this idea that, and again, I got that mentality that you just have to go nonstop. And while there may be seasons where that's necessary, like you said, you have to replenish, you have to step back. The ministry of, you mentioned Moses and Paul, but even Jesus Christ himself is one of not always being busy. and always in a hurry. And so I'm looking forward to
Mhm.
unpacking this conversation here about this idea of sabbatical in general.
Yeah, yeah. And here's the thing: I have not changed much of what I am doing. I've changed some of how I'm doing it. Just let me give you
Mm,
just a little perspective of me, kind of in kind of a weekly workflow for me. I am every week preparing new content for a Sunday morning sermon. Obviously, every week as a pastor, I do that. Additionally, I am often leading a Wednesday evening Bible study, or minimally, am having training sessions with our pastoral interns at our church. At any given time, also, I'm creating new content for messages that I'm preaching at conferences, my own conference. I spoke at Idea Summit earlier this year. That was a new prep. Uh, I teach Bible college and seminary, 10 to 15 hours per semester. Um, I've made a commitment personally to pray through my church roster weekly, and that commitment is oftentimes stressed because of our ever
yeah.
growing church. Um, it takes a long time, man, to pray by name for a couple
Wow.
of hundred
Yeah.
people, and it's just something I decided if I was going to pastor a church, I was going to pray for the people. The only way I know how to do it is to pull the roster out and pray for them by name. Takes time. I'm committed to training new ministry leaders in our church. That is future pastors, future like ministry leaders in our ministry. Last fall, I did a 10-week series just for leaders, all new content I'll probably share on the podcast at some point, just of training lay leaders. Not to
Mm,
mention the things that are occasional, like death, weddings, angry
mm,
people, hurting people, searching people, struggling people that need my virtually what we would consider ever present attention. They're going to call me, they're going to email me, they're going to text me. Um, uh, I had a man recently wanted to have breakfast because he was facing the 40th wedding anniversary of he and his wife. And his wife had passed away suddenly of a heart attack during the COVID situation.
mm,
Um, I've spent time with a pastor recently who returned from vacation to a group of 7 leaders in his church that had demanded his resignation, and
mm.
walked through that with him. And now that same man has recently relocated to Florida and is involved in getting my help from him on a consistent basis. As you all know, I spend a ton of time preparing to travel, outside speaking. I'm recording this particular episode from Houston, Texas,
Yeah.
where ironically, as I'm recording this, it is 4 days before Easter of 2023, which we are, of course, having Easter and also beginning a brand new church on Easter Sunday, a Spanish congregation. And I have an innumerable amount of people, I think, that seek advice. I mentioned, I think, in the last one of our last episodes that one of my former college students is coming down to Florida for a few hours. I have a pastor the same week next week who reached
Mm,
to me out of the blue and said, "I don't have any friends. Would you be willing to spend a little bit of time with me?" Of course, if I can. Prayer, advice, counsel, it just goes and goes and goes and goes and goes. And of course, I have 5 children. Five.
five.
One, two, three, four, five, which my wife and I are committed in rotation to spending 1 hour of concentrated time with each of them each month. So
Wow.
once a week, I'm taking Blake out to McDonald's for a Happy Meal. Then next week, I'm taking Ashley, and then I'll take Adriana for coffee. And then Angie does the same thing. Oh, and yes, by the way, I am married to my wife, Angie, of almost now 21 years. And I say all that, it almost sounds exhausting just to say it. But I can honestly tell you, Luke, and did he mention the podcast, which should be obvious. There's a lot of time that goes into that. But I'm not stressed. I'm not overwhelmed. I'm not burnt out. I've never felt burnout. I've been tired. Uh, I believe that God has shown grace by giving me insight into daily, weekly, annual rhythms of rest and solitude. You've mentioned the word Sabbath, into my regular life that was birthed out of my actual Sabbath experience, led me to rhythms that I can be busy, I can be productive, but at the same time, I refuse to be busy and productive at the high cost of my health, my family, and my joy. So I'm telling you that I accomplished these things that I just described to you within the confines of a reasonable and regular work week. You had mentioned, exceeding 50-hour work week. I honestly, Luke, I don't know that I ever have in any recent years exceeded a 50-hour work week. Now, there are seasons. There are weeks that are busier than others, like conference weeks, or like this week's a little stretch because I'm traveling and there's a heavy load on the back end of this week. There are a few times like that, but that next week, I'm not even having a staff meeting. I'm probably only going to be in the office 3 days out of 5 next week. You got to understand those kinds of things. But God does not want us to live frazzled, distracted, frustrated lives. Okay. He wants us to be productive, but he also wants us to do it at a pace that is reasonable, healthy, and sustainable, for that matter. And so I am proposing through this episode, or few episodes, I am proposing a rhythm of silence, absence from speaking to anybody but God, eliminating distractions so that I can engage. Okay, if I'm only going to put in, let's say 40 hours a week or whatever, okay, and I'm going to do everything I'm doing, then that means I've got to be dead focused. Okay, I've got to be intentional, and I've got to know what my priorities are. I've got to know how to fit them in, and I've got to know what to keep away from me in order for me to be able to do that. I have got to be willing to voluntarily and temporarily withdraw into isolation with God, with my family, with my own thoughts, in order for me to be able to function at a high level without coming apart while doing it. So that basically, that was the big lesson for my sabbatical. Okay. This whole idea that I don't have to need, I know some guys, they run so hard. It's like every other month they've got to take 2 or 3 weeks off. Well, I don't think I don't think that is healthy. I think regular and systematic rhythms of silent solitude and hard work with the right kinds of practices will enable you to do that. Now, let me say, before I get into my my little outline here that I want to give you, is let me see if I'm going to cover it. Yeah, I'll get into that. Let's go through these, Luke. So here's the basic outline: 10 ways that I can eliminate noise in order to gain more peace and productivity. That's what we're talking about. With that lengthy introduction, I think that'll help us get where we're going.
It was great to have you join us for this episode. And if you want to make sure that you don't miss any upcoming content, you're going to want to make sure that you're subscribed to our YouTube channel and that you follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you enjoy this content, then please don't hesitate to leave us that 5-star review, and then also tell other church leaders and pastors about this podcast. We would really appreciate you helping us spread the word. This podcast is hosted by Bryan Sams. It's produced by myself, Luke Clayton, and my team at mustincrease.com. We really look forward to having you join us in the next episode as we continue to advance a reformation, a fellowship, partnership, and gospel hope amongst Bible-believing pastors and churches right here on Church Advance with Bryan Sams.